Hey all, so shoutouts to all solo raid last minute hitters right now. So here's a quick guide to you all. Without delaying, let's get right into it. Since the boss is relatively simple this time around with no complicated mechanics, this video might end up focusing a bit more on team comps. But even so, I'll try to give some tips as well for this fight that could help improve damage. The boss has core, so having units that are effective on core is beneficial. Machine gun units and sniper rifles should be pretty solid on this boss. This fight is also doable with no healer, but there's only a few teams that don't really utilize healer anyways. But if you are attempting no healer teams, you will have to make sure to cover the targeted and AoE attacks, and also make sure to equip at least SR phased 5 dull to each unit to survive easier. There's an elemental shield QTE that requires a wind unit, but it is also possible to do this run without a wind unit, but you're going to need strong healers like the team with Helm, and also you'll probably end up needing to make sure that they are properly geared as well. When the boss gets closer, it'll do a targeted attack that pretty much kills your unit if you don't cover properly. I recommend swapping out to that character and manually covering it so that the team continuously shoots still during and you don't lose any DPS. For some of you in PC, you might have changed your settings into sync cursor and crosshair. But this time around, the boss has core and tends to move around. Personally, I find it easier to keep track of the boss's core by turning the sync cursor off. You guys may have seen me do this on stream. It may take a while to get used to, but you should see some improvements, especially if you notice that your attacks are snapping weirdly with the sync cursor. One other thing that helped my damage as well is making sure that you can reach 14 bursts throughout the fight if you have a cooldown reduction unit. Usually this means that you end up the fight with bursting with your second B3 burster. If you end up the fight with your first burster, then it usually means that you have bursted only around 13 times or 11 times only. One thing that you'll have to make sure that you're doing this correctly is making sure that there's no gap between your bursts. This also means that during the transitional phase QTE, you should be able to be in the state of full burst. In order to be able to do this properly, you may have to either speed up or slow down doing the first elemental shield QTE that happens early on. This can help align some burst timeline better. But yeah, otherwise the fight is pretty easy. It's just kind of getting used to the fight and making sure that you can target the core consistently and don't leave a gap between your bursts. With that though, let's move on to teams. First team that we have is, as usual, the Crown team with Crown, Wind Asuka, Siren, Wind Ray, and this time around is Delta. Some people would probably opt into Naga if they don't want to spend some resources, but for Delta, you can actually use her and just invest in 10-1-1 for Siren synergy, because this allows Siren to do a little bit more damage as well, and bonus on the extra damages that because of machine gun. You'll probably just have to equip it with Resilience Cube on Delta, since a lot of you are probably not gonna even invest or overload her. Some people did see some notable increase in damage comparatively, so if you have some spare resources on the skill books, then maybe you might want to try Delta instead. The other team is, if you don't have Evangelion, then there is the Rappy Red Hood, and then any machine gun really, like Winter Ludmilla or Modernia or maybe Mihara if you want to. But these are also just enhancing Siren's damage because of having machine guns. It's pretty useful for people that missed the Eva collab and probably are coming back for this patch. The other team is the Liberaglio. There's not much variance on this. People would usually end up doing is putting Liberaglio and Scarlet Black Shadow together. The only other team is that I didn't really list out on this is moving Liberaglio to pretty much like any other team that needs wind. Then the other setup that I have done and shown here is you can have Nayuda as well together with her if you perhaps maybe are not gonna have like the Miranda team that I'm about to talk in later soon, and also, or maybe if you just really don't have any Scarlet Black Shadow and you want to keep the other teams consistently, then you can still put her in the maid's team as well, and maybe just put in a supporting unit that could help buff her DPS. Next up is the Nayuta team. I did talk about this in a previous video, but this is pretty much a Miranda Treasure crit team. You must have Miranda Treasure on this, and you have to have Nayuta as the highest attack for best results. If she's second highest, it'll still do some decent damage, but you'll probably be missing like 1/4 of its damage potential. So you have Miranda, Nayuta, Helm, and then Maxwell, and then the Killer Wife, but pretty much any cooldown reduction unit in here. Other consistent substitutes for these team, if some of your units are really too high attack and maybe taking the buff from Nayuta, is to replace either of those to Summer Sakura or Mihara. These units tend to not have like self-attack buffs, which will make it easier for Nayuta to have higher attack, but they should be also solid DPSs still. Now, if you don't really have Nayuta with Miranda combo, maybe it's just not feasible, or Miranda is just not invested as well, or you don't want to invest in Miranda, then you can also just use a standard team with like Roppy Red Hood as your B1, or she can also be your B3 as well, and then using Ludmilla and Mihara. And if for some reason you don't really have Nayuta, but maybe you somehow have Miranda, not sure why, but you know, maybe you just ran out of resources, then you can use the Miranda standard team with Mihara. Ideally, Mihara being the highest attack, so she gets the buff, or if you're having trouble, then there is also Ada as well. This utilizes the Summer Rosanna team for the source of wind. Next up is the shotgun team. This is relatively pretty straightforward. There's the no healer team with Dove, Grave, Summer Doro, and Treasure Drake, with Volume or Dala as the source of wind for this team. Do keep in mind that since this is running no healer, you're probably gonna need like SR5 Dal on all of these units. You can replace Grave with pretty much any other B2 units. But if you want to take it a little bit easier, then you can go with the bunnies and using Blanc instead. Then with the other bunny being Noir or Rouge instead. Next up is the Cinderella team, and this one is pretty much just fill in with whatever you have left. Most people tend to have a leftover meta DPSs that are top tiers, so you're combining Cinderella, Mihara over spec, Roppy Red Hood over spec, and then whichever burst 2 that you can have that's left over, most commonly Bunny Aid, and then your other source of wind, which is either Mana or Summer Sakura. Then if you want to take it a little bit step easier on this team as well, then you can replace the burst 2 with Blanc instead, but you're gonna end up making sure that you're using Rouge as well as your source of B1. Then the other Cinderella setup is basically if you end up using Roppy and Mihara to other teams, as I mentioned earlier, then you can end up putting in the electric team, usually with Rouge, Cinderella, and then Summer Anise, and then just flexing it with either Blanc or Summer Sakura or Mana as your source of wind. And finally, if you have Summer Rosanna, you can use her along with Cinderella and then just kind of mix and match with whichever team you have left over. Finally, here are some other possible alternatives that you could end up having to as a leftover if you don't have some particular teams that are set up. You have Roppy Red Hood with the Grave team and maybe using Red Hood as well as your other B3, and then using Mana and then Mihara. Mana hyper buffs Red Hood in this situation, so try to avoid having another sniper rifle or rocket launcher in this team if you're using this. Mana being the source of wind and also slightly healing the team. The other is if you have Delta used in the Crown team, then you can put in Naga in a separate team. Then that means that allows you to move and use Volume instead as maybe as your source of the wind as for B1, and then just swap in like any really DPSs. Ideally the units that are benefiting with core damage, so like Roppy Red Hood, or Alice are here. Then there's the sustain team, so you have the litter with Summer Rosanna and then using Mihara and Raven, and then just putting in a healer that you could use. I just want to note that maybe some of you end up not being lucky and maybe you don't have Liberaglio. tried and true, you still have the Alice Scarlet Black Shadow still. And finally, here are some different team combinations that you could end up using. You can follow here, or maybe look into the document guide as well. There's the standard with the usual Siren Crown team, and then Liberalia with the maids and SBS, and then the third team with Naruto and the crit damage Miranda team, and then the shotgun team, and then the Cinderella team. Now there are some counts that don't have Evangelion. Then you could pretty much just put in Roppy Red Hood and Ludmilla in that team, and then putting in after that is just going and opting into a electric team. Here's also a combination with no Miranda Treasure, and pretty much you're just going to use Naruto as kind of like a standard burst 2, and you're just putting in with whatever units that you have, like the Killer Wife as the standard B1, or you could even use Roppy Red Hood as the B1. And then you're just gonna use pretty much the same units as the before, but you could take advantage of it and use Ludmilla and other Mihara in there, and then switching in the Cinderella theme for electric oriented team comp, so you might have to end up like slotting in Summer Anise instead. Then here's a setup also with no shotgun team. As usual for the other setups as well, you might end up just using Roppy Red Hood as B1, and then using Rouge in the electric team instead, and then just moving some units around. Since this boss has core, you could try to take advantage using Red Hood as your other DPS and being hyper buffed by mana, with mana also being a source of healing. And finally, to all the lazy people out there, I know some of you just want to have a setup that really you just want to hold left click. Here are some setup themes. The crown team is pretty standard with the Siren, Naga, and crown, but then you also have the maids with Liberalia and SBS. But for the other setups, you will have Naruto with the healer. You could either use Miranda or standard Naruto in there. And then for the shotgun, I would opt into using the bunnies as the other healer in that, and you can use B1 with Rouge, or you can use Noir in that setup as well. And then for the other team, you could end up like using mana as your other source of healer, and then from there just using mana and then just holding left click. Finally, after all of this, if you're still lacking some wind units, you pretty much just fill in the blank with whatever wind units you don't have, or maybe you might opt into a just having healer team comps. Wind has relatively less amount of DPSs right now, so it's pretty hard to just kind of get around with it, unlike the other elements, which I feel that there's getting pretty much every single team has like a full DPS of the correct element as B3, but for wind they are struggling right now still, so the team building is a little bit difficult for a number of people. But yeah, I kind of expect a little bit more wind in the upcoming soon, but I think maybe this upcoming winter though, it's likely going to be water, or the new year will be water. Well, this new year I'm kind of expecting overspec Anise, and we might end up having water on her. The final elemental rotation for overclock that we are missing is water, so you know, you can see that it's pretty much coming. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me for now. Thank you all for watching. As usual, if you guys end up enjoying the content, make sure you're subscribed, like, and leave a comment if you guys want to. Wondering what you guys end up scoring, and did you guys reach your goal this time around? Anyways, let me know what your guys' thoughts are. That's gonna be it for me for now. As usual, come hang out at twitch.tv/guydjlv. That's about it, and I'll see you guys next time.